The flames were already licking at the schoolhouse door when Cole Brennan heard the scream. He'd been watering his horse at the creek when the smoke first curled black against the desert sky. Another building in Perdition Gap going up, third one this month. But this scream cut through the desert air like a blade, high and desperate, the kind that made a man's blood turn cold. Cole spurred his mare hard toward the schoolhouse, dust clouds billowing behind him. The building sat at the edge of town, isolated by design. Nobody wanted their children too close to the saloons and gambling halls that made Perdition Gap what it was. Now that isolation meant death. Through the smoke-hazed windows he could see her. A young woman, maybe 25, pressed against the far wall with something clutched tight to her chest. The front door was already consumed by orange tongues, and the back exit had collapsed under a burning beam. She was trapped. Cole didn't hesitate. He kicked his horse close to the side window, stood in his stirrups and smashed the glass with his boot heel. Heat blasted his face as he squeezed through the narrow frame, his leather chaps catching on the jagged edges. "Mom, we need to move now." She turned toward him, tears streaming down her soot-stained cheeks. In her arms, wrapped in a singed blue blanket, was a baby no more than 6 months old. The infant's tiny fist poked out, perfectly still. "Please," she gasped, her voice breaking. "Take my baby first. Leave me, just save him." Cole's hat fell from his head as he stepped closer, the brim spinning to the floor where flames immediately began to eat at its edges. The woman's eyes held a mother's desperate love, the kind that would sacrifice everything for a child's breath of life. The ceiling groaned above them. Burning timber crashed behind him, blocking their path to the window. Smoke thickened, turning the air into poison. The woman pressed the baby toward him, her hands shaking. "Please." Cole looked at the infant's peaceful face, then back at the mother's pleading eyes. In that moment he knew what he had to do, but the choice would change everything that came after. The schoolhouse shuddered, and somewhere in the distance, he heard the thunder of approaching hoofbeats. "No, Mom." Cole's voice cut through the crackling flames. "We all go together, or nobody goes." He swept both mother and child into his arms, feeling the woman's surprised gasp against his shoulder. She was lighter than he'd expected, fragile as desert sage, but she fought him. "You don't understand. The baby, I understand plenty." Cole turned toward the collapsed back wall, scanning for another way out. "What's your name?" "Sarah. Sarah Whitmore." Her voice was barely a whisper. "And this is Thomas." The name hit Cole like a physical blow. Whitmore. He knew that name, knew it from wanted posters and whispered warnings in every saloon from here to Santa Fe. But this woman, this frightened mother, she didn't look like she belonged to that particular legacy of blood and betrayal. "Sarah, I need you to hold tight to that baby and trust me." The roof beam above them groaned, ready to fall. Cole spotted what he was looking for, a section of the back wall where the fire had eaten through the wooden planks, but hadn't yet consumed the frame. Dangerous, but possible. He kicked hard, once, twice. The weakened board splintered outward, creating a gap barely wide enough to squeeze through. Beyond it, his mare waited, dancing nervously as sparks fell like deadly snow. "When I push you through, you climb straight onto that horse. Don't look back, don't hesitate." Sarah nodded, clutching Thomas tighter. But as Cole lifted her toward the gap, she turned back to him with eyes that held secrets. "Cole Brennan." He froze. She knew his name, though he hadn't told her. That was never a good sign in his line of work. "You saved us. But when they come asking, and they will come asking, you tell them Sarah Whitmore died in this fire. You tell them Thomas died too." Before he could respond, she pushed through the gap, landing hard on the other side. Cole followed, his shoulders scraping against the burning wood. They mounted his horse together, Sarah in front with the baby, Cole behind with the reins. As they rode hard away from the schoolhouse, Cole saw the riders approaching from the east. 5 men, riding fast, their hats pulled low. Even at a distance, he could see the glint of badges on their chests. "Marshals," Sarah whispered, her voice tight with fear. "They're not here to help." Cole understood then. The fire hadn't been an accident, and Sarah Whitmore, whoever she really was, had just made him part of something much bigger than a simple rescue. The schoolhouse collapsed behind them in a shower of sparks and flame, taking with it any evidence of what had really happened inside. The abandoned mine shaft 3 miles north of Perdition Gap had been Cole's hideout for the better part of 2 years. Carved deep into red rock, it stayed cool even in the brutal desert heat and offered a clear view of anyone approaching across the flats. Sarah sat on a wooden crate, nursing Thomas while Cole kept watch at the entrance. The baby had finally stopped crying, his tiny fingers wrapped around his mother's thumb. In the dim light of Cole's oil lamp, they looked like a painting, Madonna and child, surrounded by shadows and secrets. "They're not real marshals." Sarah's voice was steady now, no longer the desperate whisper from the schoolhouse. "Real marshals don't burn down buildings with people inside." Cole turned from the mine entrance. "Then who are they?" "Men my husband hired. Before he died." She adjusted the blanket around Thomas. "My husband was James Whitmore. Maybe you heard of him." Cole had heard of him. All right. James Whitmore, cattle baron, land grabber, and according to most folks, murderer. He'd owned half of 3 counties before someone put a bullet in his back 6 months ago. "James left me and Thomas everything. The ranch, the cattle, the silver claims up in the mountains, but his brother Marcus thinks it should all be his." Sarah's laugh was bitter. "So he hired these men to make sure there's no widow and no heir to contest his claim." Sound of hoofbeats echoed off the canyon walls. Cole moved deeper into the mine, motioning for Sarah to stay quiet. Through a crack in the rocks, he could see them, 5 riders spread out in a search pattern, moving slowly across the desert floor. The leader was a tall man with a black beard, a real badge pinned to his vest but wearing it all wrong, like a costume instead of authority. Marcus Whitmore's money could buy a lot of things, including corrupt lawmen. "Split up," the false marshal called out. "Check every cave, every wash, every shadow." They couldn't have gone far on one horse. Cole watched them divide into pairs, one man staying behind to watch the horses. The mine shaft had 2 entrances, the main one they'd used, and a narrow crawlway that led out behind a boulder field. But reaching it meant traveling deeper into the mine, through passages Cole had never fully explored. "Sarah," he whispered, "how well do you know these mountains?" "Well enough. James used to bring me up here when we were courting." "There's another way out through the back tunnels," but a gunshot cracked across the desert, followed by another. The men were shooting into caves, trying to flush out their prey. "But what?" Sarah's face was pale in the lamplight. "The back tunnel leads to an old native burial ground. The Apaches consider it sacred. Anyone caught there—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Outside, the false marshals were getting closer. Cole could hear their boots on the rocks, their low voices carrying through the still air. "Found fresh horse tracks here." Thomas stirred in Sarah's arms, making soft baby sounds that seemed impossibly loud in the echoing cave. If he cried now, they were all dead. Cole made his choice. He handed Sarah his extra ammunition, checked his Colt, and moved toward the mine entrance. "Stay deep in the shadows. If I don't come back, you'll come back." Sarah's voice held a conviction that surprised him. "You're not the kind of man who walks away." The footsteps were almost at the entrance now. Cole pressed himself against the mine wall as the first false marshal appeared at the entrance, silhouetted against the desert sunset. The man moved cautiously, gun drawn, squinting into the darkness. "Come out, Mrs. Whitmore. We know you're in there." Cole waited until the man stepped fully inside, then struck fast, arm around the throat, hand over the mouth, dragging him deeper into the mine. The struggle was brief and silent. When it was over, Cole had the man's gun and his uniform shirt. He changed quickly, pulling on the marshal's shirt over his own clothes. It was a poor disguise, but in the dim light it might buy them precious seconds. Sarah emerged from the shadows, Thomas sleeping peacefully in her arms, despite the danger surrounding them. "There's something I need to tell you," she whispered. "About why I know your name." Cole froze. In all the chaos, he'd almost forgotten that moment in the burning schoolhouse. James wasn't the man people thought he was. Yes, he was hard, and yes, he did things, but he also helped people, quietly. He knew about your work, Cole, knew about the families you've helped, the men you've brought to justice when the law wouldn't. She reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a small leather journal, its pages yellowed and worn. He kept records, names, places, debts of honor. Your name is in here 17 times. 17 times you helped someone who couldn't help themselves. Cole took the journal with shaking hands. His own name stared back at him from pages of careful handwriting, dates, locations, descriptions of actions he'd thought were secret. Why are you showing me this? Because I want you to know when you chose to save us both, instead of just Thomas, you did exactly what James would have done, what a good man does. The sound of voices outside grew closer. The other marshals had found their missing partner's horse. There's something else. Sarah's voice was barely a breath. The baby, Thomas, he's not James' son. Cole looked down at the sleeping infant. In the lamplight, he could see features that didn't match what he remembered of James Whitmore, the softer chin, the different shape of the ears. His father was a young Apache brave, who worked on our ranch. He was murdered 3 months before Thomas was born, killed by the same men who are hunting us now. They killed him because Marcus Whitmore found out about us, and James claimed the baby as his own to protect us. The voices were at the mine entrance now. That's why they want Thomas dead, not just for the inheritance, but because his real father was Apache. Marcus can't stand the thought of native blood in the family line, even if it's not really in the family line at all. Cole understood now. This wasn't just about money or land. This was about hate, the kind that poisoned everything it touched. He handed the journal back to Sarah. Then we make sure they never get the chance. Thomas opened his eyes then, looking up at Cole with the kind of trust that only babies possessed. One tiny hand reached out, grasping at the air, and Cole found himself extending his finger. The baby's grip was surprisingly strong. In that moment, something shifted in Cole's chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced since he was a child himself. We're going to get you both out of here, he whispered. I promise. The false marshals rushed into the main chamber of the mine, just as Cole's dynamite charges exploded in the tunnel behind them. The blast sealed the entrance, trapping all 5 men in the darkness, with no way out, except the narrow back passage Cole and Sarah were already navigating. This way, Sarah whispered, leading them through passages that seemed impossibly tight. Thomas remained quiet, as if he sensed the danger around them. The tunnel sloped upward, winding through rock formations that had been carved by ancient waters. They emerged behind the boulder field, just as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. In the distance, Cole could see smoke rising from what remained of the schoolhouse. The whole town would be talking about the fire, about the mysterious woman and child who had vanished without a trace. There's a way station about 10 miles south, Cole said, helping Sarah mount his horse. From there you can catch the stage to California, start over. But Sarah shook her head. I'm not running anymore. She reached into her saddlebag and pulled out an official-looking document, sealed with red wax. James left more than just a will. He left a confession, names, dates, evidence of every corrupt deal Marcus made, every man he had killed. It's all here, including testimony about the Apache brave who was murdered. She looked down at Thomas, who was sleeping peacefully in her arms. Oh, this baby's father died protecting our ranch from cattle thieves. He was a hero, and his son deserves to know that. Cole took the document, scanning its contents by moonlight. It was enough to hang Marcus Whitmore and everyone who worked for him. Oh. The territorial governor's been looking for evidence like this for years. If we can get it to him, we can. James arranged for safe passage through Apache territory, a treaty he negotiated before he died. Oh. His friend, an Apache chief named Standing Bear, has been waiting to honor that agreement. As if summoned by her words, riders appeared on the ridge above them. But these weren't false marshals or hired guns. These were Apache warriors, their faces painted for war, their weapons ready. The leader rode down to meet them, a man in his 50s with silver-streaked hair and eyes that held the wisdom of someone who had seen too much death. "Sarah Whitmore," he said in accented English, "we have been waiting, standing bare. This is Cole Brennan, the man who helped me save Thomas." The Apache chief studied Cole with those ancient eyes, then nodded slowly. "A man who protects children protects the future. You are welcome in our territory." What followed was the strangest night of Cole's life. They rode through Apache lands, under the protection of warriors, who materialized out of the darkness like spirits. At dawn, they reached the territorial capital, where Standing Bear himself presented James Whitmore's confession to the governor. Marcus Whitmore was arrested that same day. The false marshals, those who survived the mine collapse, were tried and hanged within a month. The Apache brave's murder was officially recognized, and his son Thomas was granted full rights as a territorial citizen. Sarah used her inheritance to establish a school for Apache and Mexican children, teaching them alongside white children in defiance of territorial law. She never remarried, but she was never alone. Cole found reasons to visit the school regularly, bringing supplies and stories from his travels. Years later, when Thomas was old enough to understand, Sarah would tell him about the day a cowboy dropped his hat and shielded them both from danger. She would tell him about his real father's courage, and about the man who chose to save a mother and child, when he could have just saved one. And sometimes, when the desert wind was just right, you could see them all together, Sarah teaching in the schoolyard, Thomas playing with children of every color, and Cole Brennan watching from the shade of a cottonwood tree, his hat tilted low but his eyes always alert. Oh, the past had been rewritten, but the future belonged to all of them.